Pope Leo XIV has officially broken his silence on the traditional Latin Mass. This marks the first significant step under his papacy regarding one of the most divisive and sensitive issues facing the Catholic Church today. For months, traditional Catholic communities around the world have endured uncertainty, suppression, and confusion. From dioceses in Texas to cities like Charlotte and Detroit, restrictions on the ancient liturgy have continued with almost no explanation or clarity, but now something has shifted. On May 28, 2025, a surprising decision emerged from the Vatican. Pope Leo XIV, through the appropriate church offices, granted a 2-year extension for the celebration of the Latin Mass at the parish of Santa Margherita in San Angelo, Texas. This might seem like a small gesture to those unfamiliar with the wider picture. But for Catholics devoted to the 1962 Missal, it's a moment of hope. This is the first time during Pope Leo XIV's pontificate that such a decision has been made. Until now, the legal framework left behind by his predecessor remained untouched. That framework, shaped by the controversial Traditionis Custodes, and its subsequent restrictions had left little room for exceptions. The sudden and often unexplained enforcement of those rules left many traditional communities feeling silenced, excluded, and even abandoned. But the Vatican's approval of this extension is not just an administrative gesture. It is a break in the pattern. It's a gesture that suggests something deeper. It's a quiet but powerful message that perhaps the new pope is listening. Perhaps he is not entirely on board with the uncompromising stance taken by those before him. This decision was officially confirmed by Bishop Michael Sis, who obtained permission from the Dicastery for Divine Worship. It allows the ancient Roman rite, the Mass of the Ages, to continue for 2 more years in that parish church. Father Ryan Rojo, the director of vocations in San Angelo and one of the leaders involved in the local traditional Catholic community, expressed public gratitude toward Pope Leo and the Vatican office. His reaction was not just polite, it was heartfelt. He recognized that this wasn't just about a procedural delay. It was a recognition, however, cautious that the traditional Mass still has a place within the Church. In today's Church, where the ancient liturgy has been treated like a foreign element, something outdated or even rebellious, this extension feels like a breath of fresh air. It breaks the cycle of prohibition. It opens a small window of dialogue. It says, perhaps not loudly, but clearly enough, tradition is not dead. Not yet, not entirely. What makes this more significant is the context. Pope Leo XIV is still early in his papacy. He hasn't changed any rules or officially reformed any of the documents that caused the initial wave of restrictions. But actions speak louder than words. By allowing this extension, he may be quietly signaling a possible revaluation. Some observers believe he is being cautious, simply biding time. Others see this as a moment of potential change. But regardless of how one interprets it, the tone has changed. It's undeniable. The Catholic Church doesn't operate through coincidence. In such a hierarchical and symbolic institution, every public decision carries weight. The fact that the traditional Latin Mass is once again being spoken of not in terms of banning, but in terms of accompanying and granting, is a marked shift. It gives the impression, still faint but not insignificant, that the Pope is considering a more fatherly role, less as a mere enforcer of inherited policies, and more as a shepherd of all Catholics, traditional or otherwise. At the same time that Pope Leo's decision was made public, another strong voice entered the discussion. Archbishop Carlo Vigano, a well-known and often controversial figure, published a powerful and emotional letter addressed directly to Pope Leo XIV. The timing was striking. On the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, a day of deep spiritual importance for the universal Church, Vigano released what can only be described as a passionate appeal for the restoration of true Catholic identity. In his letter, Vigano did not mince words. He spoke with clarity and urgency. For him, the assault on the traditional Mass is more than a liturgical dispute. It is a symptom of a deeper sickness of hostility, not only toward tradition, but toward the very Roman heart of the Church. In Vigano's view, to be Catholic is to be Roman. not in a narrow geographical sense, but in a spiritual, cultural, and doctrinal one. He quotes Dante, reminding readers that Christ is Roman in the mystery of salvation. Rome, for Vigano, represents the sacred language of Latin, the ancient calendar of saints, the continuity of liturgical practice, and the living memory of the martyrs. All of these are being pushed aside, he argues, by a modernist tendency that seeks to remake the Church in the image of the world. In strong language, Vigano accuses the Second Vatican Council, and those who interpreted it through modernist lenses of stripping the liturgy of its sacredness. He argues that Latin was not removed for pastoral reasons, but because it stood in the way of innovation, preserved unity, reverence, and doctrinal clarity. And because of that, it became a target. Vigano draws on the writings of Dom Guéranger, emphasizing that those who hate the Latin language are often those who oppose the unity and authority of the Catholic Church itself. In one of the most powerful moments of his letter, he makes a direct appeal to Pope Leo XIV. He asks the Pope to renounce what he calls Pagaglian excesses, a reference to the direction taken under the previous pontiff. He urges him to abandon the confusing synodality that, in Vigano's view, has led to doctrinal vagueness and pastoral inconsistency. Instead, he calls on Pope Leo to return to the full exercise of the Petrine office. He asks him to act like Peter to feed the sheep and the lambs, not with compromise, not with adaptation, but with truth and clarity. Vigano reminds the Pope that true mercy is always grounded in truth, and that true peace comes from faithfulness, not popularity. While this letter was strong in tone, it was also deeply sincere. Whether one agrees with Vigano's style or not, his words reflect the pain felt by many faithful Catholics. For them, the traditional Mass is not a nostalgic relic, but a living expression of their faith. Suppression is felt like a betrayal. This letter, then, is not just a political statement, it is a spiritual cry. At the same time as this small window is opened for tradition, there is movement in the opposite direction. In the very same period, the Vatican announced plans for a new liturgical development, the so-called Mass for the Care of Creation. This liturgy, described in cheerful language by the Vatican Press Office, aims to celebrate environmental responsibility. But for many it appears less like a sacred rite and more like a political statement. According to reports, this Mass will be formally presented by Cardinal Michael Czerny and Monsignor Vittorio Viola. Both are known for their strong support of the previous Pope's environmental agenda. In fact, Viola has previously been linked to attempts to completely prohibit the traditional Latin Mass. He is also reported to wear the episcopal ring of Annibale Bugnini, one of the architects of the post-Vatican II liturgical reforms. This symbolic alignment has not gone unnoticed. Too many faithful Catholics. It sends a chilling message. The ancient Mass of saints and martyrs is banned or marginalized, while new liturgies based on environmental themes are being introduced and celebrated with great enthusiasm. It feels to many like a painful contradiction. How is it that a liturgy focused on ecological awareness is given more freedom than the Mass that nourished the Church for centuries? This question lingers heavily in the minds of those who feel exiled within their own church. For them, this is not about politics or ideology, it's about salvation, reverence, and the soul of the liturgy. In many parts of the world, celebrations influenced by indigenous customs, such as Amazonian and Mayan rites, have been encouraged in the name of cultural inclusion. Yet the Mass that shaped Christian civilization, that formed saints and theologians, that stood unchanged through centuries of war and peace, is forced to beg for temporary permissions. It must fight for survival within its own spiritual homeland. Pope Leo XIV now stands at a turning point. He can continue along the same uncertain path, granting occasional concessions, but leaving the underlying restrictions in place, or he can choose a new path, one that restores to the Church not just a rite, but a sense of continuity, stability, and reverence. The extension he granted in Texas is a signal, but signals are not enough. Tradition does not need to be tolerated. It needs to be embraced. It needs to be honored. It needs to be protected. not as a museum piece, but as a living and breathing part of the Church. The Church today is in crisis, not only because of external pressures, but because of internal division. One part of the Church sees the faith as something inherited, something to be preserved. Another part sees it as something to be reshaped and reinterpreted according to the spirit of the age. Pope Leo's challenge is to reconcile these views without losing the soul of the Church. You must be both a leader and a listener. You must be courageous, not just cautious. The traditional Latin Mass is more than a liturgical preference. It is a symbol of fidelity,